the recording has started.
Okay,
Thank you.
it is 12:03 on March 17th. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. And I call to order the March 17th, 2025 BCBB board meeting. First item that we do is roll call. All board members are present, which include Brian, Sarah, Laura, Dan, and myself. Christine, you want to do a rundown of staff in attendance?
Yes, we have Heron Herzog, Rob Fish, Christina Sweet, Lucy Fortier, Judy Reboyne, Alexi Montserrat, Tony Clitheroe, Jose Agallo, and Yuchi Lee. And we also have JB LaCroix from the PSD, who's our finance person.
Okay, excellent. Welcome, everybody. First item that we'll take action on is approval of the agenda. I'll make a motion to approve the agenda in our packet. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Brian. Let's open it up for discussion. Are there any changes to the agenda? Laura, did you have anything you wanted to change or add?
Depending on how our bead conversation goes, I note that there's a lot of moving parts. So that might be something we need to speak about with our attorney and
Okay.
government affairs folks in executive session.
Okay. With that issue that you sent by email to me, we may be able to take it up within item 8, which deals with bead.
We may be able to.
Okay. All right. Are there any other changes or items for the agenda to talk about? Okay, all those in favor of the agenda as proposed, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? The agenda carries in favor 5-0. Let's now move on to minutes, approval of our minutes from February 10th, 2025. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as presented in our packet. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Brian. Any discussion of the minutes? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor of the minutes, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes carry 5-0. That brings us to public comment, item 3. Christine, you want to tee us up for public comment?
Yes. So if you'd like to make some comments, please raise your hand and you'll be recognized in the order that your hand was raised. And we'll be given 3 minutes to speak. So I'll take any volunteers who want to speak now. Raise your hand. Not seeing any. Okay, it looks like we don't have anybody speaking for public comment.
Okay, just to remind everybody in attendance, we do have a closing public comment line item. So if you have any items you would like to share at that time, we'll take public comment later in the meeting. Let's move on to item 4, which is Southern Vermont CUD closeout report.
Yep, and I will turn this over to Christina Sweet. Christina, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today we are going to take a few minutes to look at the Southern Vermont CUD closeout report for their construction grant. I'm going to briefly share my screen just to give a really brief overview of the grant itself. And then we have some folks from Southern Vermont who may speak to their closeout report, and then we will open it up for questions. So the Southern Vermont Construction Grant was originally awarded for $9,009,085, and it was focused on a network consisting of at least 251 miles, over 6,400 passings, and completing coverage in the towns of the Southern Vermont CUD, except for 17 addresses in the Southern Vermont Universal Service Plan. And I know their closeout reports also address how they are working to complete coverage in those 17 addresses as well. Again, Southern Vermont completed their build in December of 2023, making them the very first CUD to complete their construction project. So congratulations again to Southern Vermont. And they completed that slightly under budget and actually we de-obligated $6,636.15 of that original 9 million that we were able to put back into the pool for state and fiscal local recover state SFR, state fiscal recovery funds, and we're able to get those obligated by September 30th of this year, so or of 2024, this fiscal year. So what that means is because they were able to alert us to the fact that they underspent slightly, we were able to make sure that those funds went to another project and we weren't leaving any money on the table. So I will pass it off now to Southern Vermont to speak to their project and their closeout report.
Thank you, Christina. I'll take that on. Terry, can you all hear me? I'm Terry Dorsey. I'm the chair of the governing board of Southern Vermont CUD. Just a few notes on completion of our project that I prepared for you all. As Christina pointed out, our grant was approved in October 2022, and we were able to reach universal service in just 13 months after that approval. Construction was completed and the network was lit up in November 2023. And we were able to provide, with our partner Consolidated, up to 2 gig service across all 14 towns of our CUD. That includes Arlington, Bennington, Dorset, Landgrove, Londonderry, Manchester, Peru, Pownell, Rupert, Sandgate, Shaftesbury, Sunderland, Winhall, and Woodford. The completion of the build out, we covered around, again, this includes Consolidated's portion of the build out as well. Covered around 900 miles of fiber and 26,000 passings. The grant funded portion of the build covered approximately 7,300 passings and 1,900 previously unserved addresses. Since the closeout report was submitted November last year, CUD has continued to provide oversight of the fiber network through regular monthly meetings with the Consolidated team. Consolidated has always been thorough and responsive to questions and concerns, whether from the board or from customers. It is a positive relationship. Something anecdotally I'd like to point out about working with Consolidated and overall the build in our community. Overall, we've received remarkably few questions and concern from the public. At first, maybe a few questions per month. This has tapered off to almost none at this point. Typically, these are questions about address eligibility, and the initial group of questions, the vast majority of them were issues around North Road in Manchester, where there are discrepancies between E911 and postal addresses that we were able to resolve working with Consolidated. All of those households were eligible for service. Today, as I said, we really receive almost no eligibility questions, but recently I have started receiving questions about workforce development and apprenticeship programs from people in the community. In July last year, Southern Vermont, Otter Creek, and Lamoille CUDs executed a memorandum of understanding and jointly developed a 10-year sustainability plan covering shared consistent oversight and reporting and ongoing operational revenue. We have budgets and funds in place to cover the limited needs of the CUDs going forward, including audit, legal counsel, and administrative operations. Our primary concern at the moment is working on our audit obligations and ongoing work with the Consolidated team to keep an eye on customer service. Finally, on behalf of the board, the Southern Vermont CUD board, I would like to call out our appreciation for the help we received along the way from Callie Fishburne and Jonathan Cooper of the Bennington County Regional Commission, Brian Lim, Sarah Davis, Robert Russell, and the rest of the team at Consolidated, Christine Hallquist and the VCBB staff, and last but not least, the VCBB board for supporting us in this effort. we could not have done it without you.
Thank you
I
very
would be
much,
happy to
Terry.
take any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. That was an excellent overview, and really appreciate the fact that you guys have come in under budget, you're wrapping up, and you have a long-term relationship with an operator. It seems like it's going well. Just for a follow-up question relative to the future, how will you maintain quality assurance going forward, just to make sure that your operator Consolidated is maintaining the system appropriately and doing the things that Vermonters need relative to the fiber that's been deployed, to keeping the speed up and that customer service quality up?
We will be doing the same thing we've been doing since November 2023, which is meeting with this team on a regular basis, and they provide reporting on network status, net promoter score for customer service, and we also receive, we have mechanisms in place so that the board directly receives any notifications of outages. We have not had any outages since we put that in place.
Okay, great. Christine, how will staff be monitoring Southern Vermont CUD going forward to maintain the metrics and for quality assurance, to make sure that the operator and the Southern Vermont CUD are adhering to the grant terms?
We are just in the process of completing the UCLA monitoring system that will be up. It will be up for public as well, but we will monitoring the Southern Vermont CUD through our UCLA / IBM partnership. We'll be getting reports every week in terms of performance of every location and every ISP in the state. So we will monitor it closely to ensure that performance does not degrade.
And what about consumer issues, any sort of complaint issues that arise over time? You know, hopefully there are none. It'd be awesome if there were not, but just want to check in on the process for monitoring operations.
Yes, we work closely with the PSD. Every complaint that comes through, we see and we respond to. And I'm actually very impressed with the PSD. We typically respond within hours of any customer complaint. And there just haven't been any at this point. So.
It's certainly, obviously not at this point, but going down the road into the future. And what I'm thinking about, the situation that I lived through this last 3.5 months, with the operator Consolidated working not with fiber, but their copper system, and not maintaining the system, and not upgrading their system because it's too costly to upgrade the copper in my area. Completely understand that, but I want to make sure that we hold any operator, Consolidated, and anybody that's working with our CUDs, their feet to the fire, that the grant dollars that were deployed require them, even if it becomes a lost business case down the road, 10, 15, 20 years, it requires them to maintain the system. I don't want Vermonters left in a situation where they can't have, where the response from the operator is, well, we tried to fix it, but you know, we couldn't, and you're stuck with what you've got. That's my fundamental question. How do we ensure down the road that customer service and performance continue to be performed?
Well, with the UCLA IBM monitoring system, we should know before the customer knows if performance is degrading in general. Specifically, if there is a problem, again, we get every customer complaint comes to us. So we're watching for those complaints, and if we start seeing them, we'll take action and we'll report it to the board as well.
So the speed issue, you will get notice of any failure of speed below a certain threshold?
Well, they we're certainly will see if there's network performance issues at an individual address, that gets very complicated. So, if speed degrades at an address, it can happen with things that happen internal to the house load as well as external. We will see performance degradation of the network, but if there's a problem at the customer site, it will be their problem because we're monitoring the network itself.
And most likely we will hear about it because our constituents don't seem to have any problem with telling our board members if they have issues, whether they have anything to do with our network or not.
I mean, I certainly applaud Consolidated for partnering with you, Terry, in the Southern Vermont CUD to get fiber deployed. And it's obviously, they've done a really good job and I applaud that. I just want to hold everyone's feet to the fire going forward that if a situation were to arise where the operator is not investing funds to maintain the system, then we have a responsibility, we have a fiduciary responsibility as a state to assure that they are doing the things necessary to continue that system be vibrant, up and running, and Vermonters can use their internet service. I was left stranded at my house for 3.5 months with Consolidated, again, not fiber, not with a CUD, but Consolidated telling me this is the best I can get you, 0.1 megabytes per second, and I'm paying for 15. It's unacceptable. I've finally gotten fiber from an independent provider, but the representation from Consolidated was we're not maintaining the system because it's not a business case. It didn't make sense as a business case for them to upgrade the system. We can't have that answer for the fiber deployed across the state of Vermont with our CUDs. That is an unacceptable answer, and I can hold their feet to the fire through the CUDs and continuing to make sure that our systems with the fiber deployment are upgraded in concert with the CUDs. That's my rant, and I'm going to say that every single time we have a closeout. This is no reflection, Terry, on you as a CUD. This is a reflection on my experience with Consolidated, and I want to be very clear and loud that we're going to continue to hold them operationally accountable to maintain the system and to be sure that Vermonters are getting good, reliable internet service, not 0.1 megabytes per second.
Well, if it's any consolation, this system that we've developed in partnership with South Carolina is the most advanced in the country. So we've certainly got some of the best technology looking at it.
Laura has her hand up. Laura, you have the floor.
Thanks, Patty. And I would just like to say I wholeheartedly agree with every word you just said. Christine, how long do we have that contract, that UCLA contract?
Well, it doesn't end. We refresh it every year, essentially.
Okay. And what can we do if CCI fails to maintain the Southern Vermont system, if they refuse to fix it? And I also want to congratulate them. I'm glad that that's working. But these are the exact questions I had and continue to have.
Through our CUD, we have leverage in the areas that they serve in terms of clawing back the parts of the system that we own. But as far as regulatory goes, it goes beyond us from a regulatory standpoint. We can only regulate what we've issued in what we have in contract through the grants. The CUD has the right to pull back what they own,
Which is
which is then, I don't remember the exact number. It's not the total 26,000 addresses. It's a subset of that we paid for.
So we own the connections
Right.
and CCI owns the fiber.
No, there's
Not
portions
in
of
the
the
case of
network that the
that's
CUD
it.
owns.
Yeah.
Okay. That's it for me now. I don't think we have a great answer for what we can do if, well, I mean, I think we have an answer. I'm not sure how practical it is, but hopefully we don't have to figure it out.
Okay, thank you. Dan? Dan Nelson?
Thank you. Terry, excellent work. Thank you very much. Love the partnership. Early schedule, below budget. I'm not sure what's not to love here. So thank you. Excellent work. And I'm trusting that if something does go wrong, that maybe we'll have to lean into the department like we would with any carrier in the state. But really, I think it's a great partnership. I hope we can continue to see outstanding performance like this.
I would like to point out to the points that have been raised, we are very aware that we have a 20-year obligation of oversight for these grant-funded resources, and the board takes it very seriously how we approach that. It's even prior to our sustainability effort with Otter Creek and Lamoille, we took that very seriously, making sure that we were funded and could be operational throughout that period. And I think the sustainability agreement we have with Otter Creek and Lamoille just gives a greater foundation to that, at least for the next 10 years. And then that gives us another 10 years to figure out the second 10 years.
That's an important statement, Terry, and I really thank you for saying that. It's, it's one thing to do, you've got a great story in terms of deployment, but this is a relationship for the next 20 years that you folks are committing to monitor. And as Dan and Brian both applauded, I applaud that commitment and that investment to continue that oversight for 20 years. Thank you for that. Okay, any other comments, questions? Right. Again, thank you, Terry, and congratulations for job well done.
Again, thank you for your support to get us here. Appreciate it.
Excellent. Okay, let's move on to item 5, legislative update.
Yep, and I'll turn this over to Gwen. Gwen is our person working with the legislature. Gwen, go ahead.
Hi, folks. Gwen Zakoff here. So in your packet, I included a couple slides just to have a visual to sort of go by. Not too much to update since I was here last time in February. To set the stage a little bit, I'll give you an idea of what the timing of all of this looks like. So as of Friday, Friday was what we call crossover day in the State House, meaning that any policy bills that are going to be moving forward from one chamber to another had to make it out of their original committee of jurisdiction. And this coming Friday is the deadline for money, any sort of appropriation or funding that is attached to those policy bills having to make it out of committees. So it's a big last week and this upcoming week are big weeks in the State House. I say that so you understand where H11 and H121 are in the process. So as you recall, at the last meeting, you got a sort of an overview of H11 and H121, and those bills are in the House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee. There was initial testimony taken several weeks back, including testimony from VCBB staff. It went over quite well. It was, positive reception. There was also testimony from the Department of Public Service and the Attorney General's office and a few others. And The bills, however, did not meet the crossover deadline on Friday. So what that means is that neither of the bills are going to be moving forward this year. With that said, the bills are still sort of alive, meaning they could move forward next year. And they will continue to the committee will continue to take testimony on both of those bills over the coming month or two. It's this coming week, tomorrow, actually, the committee has testimony on H11, and no more testimony for the rest of the week on that bill. But that's sort of an indication on those bills coming back up at some point, potentially H11 being a priority, because that's the one they seem to be focusing the most energy on. But that being said, they might take up H121 again. So I just wanted to flag those and let the board know that the staff, VCBB staff might, well, not just might, probably will be asked to come in to testify on the merits or concerns they have with either or both bills. So this is an opportunity for staff and the board to not only weigh in on what's written on paper and what's in the bills, but also any ideas that the board has about how to move forward with consumer protection and affordability initiatives. So it's just something to think about, and there's no rush. It gives you some time to actually think about how you want to address things moving forward. So that's, I would see this as a benefit. It gives you a lot more runway to work with. So that's the update from my end.
Okay, thank you very much, Gwen. Any questions or comments? Going once, twice. Thank you very much, Gwen, for all your work on this, and the packet material was very helpful to read through too. That's very informational. All right, there are no more questions. Back to the agenda. Okay, that leaves us to item 6 on the agenda, which is parking lot.
Yep, and I'll turn this over to Ginny to talk about the parking lot.
I believe Jenny had to step away. She had something, she had an emergency with one of her kids. I think it's okay, but had to step away. So I was going to take over on her parking lot presentation. Let me see if I can just share my screen here. Let's see, 1 minute. Share. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Oh, I'm gonna have to, I'm sorry. Is that better?
Yep, that's good.
Okay. Let me get into presenter mode. Again. Oh, I'm sorry. This just came up last minute here. Okay. All right. Can you all hear and see?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we can see it. You're doing good.
We have several action items that are now in progress from the last board meeting, and she wanted to draw your attention to number 132. It was added after the board packet went out. Staff recently developed a draft long drop program that was shared with legal in reviewing that draft and the minutes from the meeting of September 9th, which authorizes staff to develop this program. She recognized that she missed adding this section item to the parking lot. 131 and 130 regarding H11 and H121. Those bills did not make it to crossover, as you heard, and there's a possibility they may be in the next legislative session. Number 125 is in process. Jose is working to follow up with each CUD. 124 and 123 on the next slide are both referring to the BEAD process and ensuring that staff has a resolution for the board to acknowledge they've met their requirements under BEAD. 123, staff is willing to review this in the April board meeting or in a separate training session if the board prefers. So that is all of the items that she has here and wanted to flag. And of course, we know she's super helpful, so reach out to Ginny if there are any questions.
You missed the ones that are completed. Maybe you can talk about the ones that are completed.
What was that, Christine? Was that a question for me?
Yeah, did you present the ones that were completed? I think you
Let me
missed
look.
that. Yeah.
Did.
Slide 5. Slide 5.
Process. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Slide 5. One more.
Maybe I didn't. This is the one I did. Okay. 122 and 114 and refinement of the
No,
work
slide
plan-
5 I'm talking about.
5. Okay.
There you
Items
go.
on this slide were completed. Okay. So all right. Yes. I will leave this up here to review and not read the whole thing.
So the 8 million, as the board, we talked in the last meeting, we're holding off funds. We're not doing anything with our funds until we find out what's happening with the BEAD program, which you certainly will understand after we do that presentation, why we're kind of taking our time on the 8 million. We may need it for other purposes, depending what happens with the federal government.
Christine, this is Sarah Hoffman. I'm sorry, I'm really having tech problems today. But, you said something the other day on our phone call that, if to do certain things, you'd have to get legislative approval. I totally agree we should be conservative with this money at this point in time. We don't know what's going to happen. But for the long term, I'd love to know, because you said something like we'd have to get legislation changes to do certain things with the money.
No, I said we may. I didn't say we have to.
Right. No,
Yeah.
I know, but I don't even understand for what kind of things. Could we get something about what the guardrails are? We could do this without legislation, but if we wanted to do X, Y, or Z, we would have to go back. Is there anything that can tell us, the board members, what the guardrails are?
Well, yeah, I think it's, again, we don't want to talk about necessarily legal guardrails until we have a proposal to bring to you. But in general, the ARPA CPF funds, I can talk about ARPA CPF, are for construction funds only.
Okay,
Now,
that's important.
We believe the interest we believe we can do the interest. We can use it however we see fit. But again, whatever proposal we bring to the board, we will make sure we address all the legal issues. To talk about it hypothetically doesn't really make a lot of sense, because we don't really have a proposal for you at this point. And we may not even bring a proposal depending what happens with the BEAD program. Well, there's a lot more to be discussed before we can get to what the legal guardrails are on any specific proposal we bring to the board. But I can assure you, anything we bring to the board, we will make sure that we show all the legal issues that were considered and the recommendations that result from it, assessing those legal issues.
Well, I think, though, when I read your weekly report, it talks about this flexible financing program and philanthropic fund to advance the work of the CUDs, which might be great. But are there other things being considered that I should look at or think about in terms of what if there was a straight affordability, a subsidy program? Could you do that?
The weekly report is actually a confidential report that's given to the board and the governor. And we don't, again, that, when we bring it in a public meeting, that's where we're going to bring some solid recommendations. I wouldn't want to come to the board prematurely.
Right. I agree with that. I'm wondering if we've narrowed it so much now that, we're not even considering other things.
Well, we aren't. I don't even know how to
really
answer
considering
that.
anything at this point.
I don't know how to answer your question, to tell you the truth.
Okay, maybe you and I can talk at another time, because you
Yeah,
said something at the end of our last call on Friday, and I thought, well, that's interesting. I didn't, how does that work? So maybe you and I can have another conversation.
Okay.
Laura has her hand up. Laura, you have the floor.
Yeah, I just wanted to weigh in on this particular topic and say that I really support us pausing and monitoring what is happening federally and how that may or may not affect Vermont before we decide how to move forward with those funds.
And we're going to talk some more during BEAD about this, right, Christine?
Yes, that
Okay.
we've dedicated a good chunk of the agenda for that.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments regarding the parking lot? Any issues folks want to bring
Dan-
up?
Dan
I have
has
one.
his hands
Oh,
up.
sorry, Dan.
It's just a suggestion if everybody agrees. We had talked at the last meeting about carriers who had hurdles before them to deploy fiber that may not be in our grant purview. Basically, we were talking about general carriers. Patty, it had to do with your situation in particular, but assuming that there were probably other situations. And I'm just offering that we don't have, perhaps it's not a good use of staff's time to pursue that, but instead the department could pursue that with their staff and gather that information. I'm trying to unburden the VCBB staff and utilize some other folks that may have time to collect that information for VCBB. Thoughts on that?
Christine, is there anybody at the department that could deploy that and take that exercise on?
What
In
is
terms
the
of
exercise?
non-CUDs? The exercise would be the situation that I was in, where I don't have a CUD coming by my house with fiber, but I have an incumbent carrier consolidated that's not upgrading the system, the copper system. And it took me a long time to get Mansfield Telecom to come to deploy fiber to my house because it was winter time. Seems like a bad excuse, but I think that's what Dan is asking. Is there anybody at the department that can look at folks outside the CUD paradigm, private entities like Mansfield Telecom and others, Waitsfield, others, in terms of what they're doing in any customer service issues?
This is
exactly
not
what I'm asking.
connected to the funding.
No.
Correct.
So
that's why.
Yeah. I mean, the department has, I mean, I have so much experience directing people to the department for complaints. So, I mean, they do have consumer. What is it that I'm not sure I understand what you are asking for, Dan, because they right now you can send people to the department. They'll call the providers. If there's something really egregious, perhaps, and repetitive, maybe it will go to the Attorney General.
I'm afraid that we sent in that parking lot item, we may be wasting the staff's time on things that are less productive and that it might be a bit of a wild goose chase in this role of what the staff should be focused on. As you read it, 122, it was in response to carriers that have barriers to installing fiber to the customer. And we believe that there are more than just a few houses, but why would the VCBB staff be going after that? I think it's good work for the department to be going after and gathering that information.
So they would be talking with the carriers who elected not to work with CUDs or in towns where there is no CUD or other provider working with the town.
Essentially, yeah. What are the
Is
barriers?
that the case, Patty? In your town, there's no CUD. Your town doesn't belong to a CUD.
Exactly.
So the non-CUD towns,
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Now I understand. Thanks.
Excellent.
I will reach, and in response to that, I will reach out to Hunter Thompson, the telecom person. And thank you for that advice, Dan. That does make that little more palatable, that action item. So I'll take that action item as being one that reach out to the telecommunications side of the PSD to determine what the process is for them in terms of helping those providers who are running into obstacles to getting reliable service.
We'll just learn.
But just to
We'll-
understand what their barriers are.
Yeah.
Yeah, understand
step
what their
one.
barriers are.
Exactly.
So may I?
Sure, Laura.
Yeah, I mean, I think we, through our Act 79 and Act 71, set a level playing field for every community and every small telecom provider to, be proactive and work with either a single community, which we have providers that have done, or communities to band together and work. So I think what we're talking about is communities that have elected not to do anything and providers that did not go to those communities to say, hey, we should figure this out. And so I just want to make sure that I am understanding correctly about the problem that these are folks that were not engaged in this process over the last 5 years. Communities and providers.
Laura, essentially, I think we have purview of those that are engaged, and we have a pretty good feel for what feedback we're getting through all the CUDs and VCUDA, and we understand what their challenges are. There's a whole staff that's put together out there. In Patty's case and other cases throughout the state who are unrepresented, we don't know what their challenges are, and that's what the department can take on. In my opinion, that's not a good use of this staff's time, but instead hand that over to the department to go figure out those other parts. I think our staff's time is better spent on our work.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you because our work is outlined that it's to work with those communities that wanted to work with a provider or providers that wanted to work with a community or CUDs that wanted to come together.
Yeah. So on 122, I'm suggesting, and I think we're in agreement that not to take this on in our parking lot, but instead to ask the department to take that on and unburden our team.
And I'm going to say something here regarding the situation. I feel like these entities create seams. They create seams and cracks in the system. And my address was considered served because a private telecom company, Mansfield Telecom, went by my house. Had they not been around, there would have been a CUD interested in this road because there's several houses along the road. So I got precluded from participating in a CUD situation and setup because there's a private telecom entity. That said, it took a while. I now have fiber and I'm hugely thankful, but it took a long time to get that to come to my house when the first call went out in early December of 2024. Took 3 months. Is that normal? Is that okay? Those are the questions that I think we're trying to ask and answer.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely not normal or okay. And providers that have created those situations in Vermont, I'm happy for the department to try and figure out, how to have them be a little more accountable.
Agreed. Okay, any other comments on this topic? Okay, let's now move on to VCUDA update. Rob Vitsky.
Y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Good morning. A quick update today, but first of all, obviously huge congratulations to Terry and the Southern Vermont team for what they've accomplished. And I know all the CUDs are kind of happy to celebrate these things. We can't wait for more of these celebrations of completion of these projects. And so congrats to Terry and all the folks that worked so hard on that. On the two legislative items, I just want to kind of comment on VCUDA's continuing engagement in both H11 and Senate 121. In terms of the consumer protection bill, I think there's a lot of folks in our group that are hopeful that it will get additional debate next year, and believe that there are a lot of things in there that the CBs can and will support. And so we'll learn more, obviously, as that bill comes back next year. But we were prepared to kind of engage on it this year and are looking forward to continue to do so in the future. On affordability, the conversation has continued within VCUDA. And I think, a lot of our conversation has been, okay, so if given the opportunity to an advanced affordability bill, is this the one we want? And what are the aspects that would make a great program for Vermont? And I would just say two things. One is I do believe that it would be appropriate for us and for you to think about not a program that excludes the hard cases, which is what the current one does. It says any provider less than 20,000 is exempted from the affordability program. But that in fact, we need to do our homework to make sure that all Vermonters are included, regardless of where they live. And that means we're going to need to come up with a program that provides the necessary support for Vermonters, regardless of where they live. So we're thinking about that. We're doing a lot of work, a lot of conversations. Obviously, it's a hugely complex potential set of issues. However, there are programs both in other states and nationally that we can model some of the things we're working on. And so on Senate 121, I would just say that we intend to continue working on this and attempting to bring more people together to discuss a program that could work and to be ready for the session when it starts next year. I guess the last one, and I know you guys are going to have a longer discussion about one particular federal program, but in a broad stroke sense, we are spending a lot of time tracking the federal programs and the potential disruption and opportunity that some of the things that are being discussed could bring. And I would just say, on the opportunity side, a lot of the talk is about reducing some of the requirements that honestly, I think a lot of folks will support from a values perspective, but do create onerous burdens for implementing a grant program. And so, finding ways to see how those reductions in some of the compliance and, side program interactions is probably a positive thing, and being able to adopt those in Vermont would be great. On the other hand, some of the other changes that you're going to hear about, both in BEAD and in other programs, are, potentially a change to the system that Vermont has established over the last 5 years. And I would just say, we went through a robust public comment period in almost everything the VCBB has done. You guys have done a great job of asking for comment, taking comment, reviewing it, waiting a month, taking action, and just making sure that changes and opportunities are aligned with Vermont values and the program's direction in general. And so I think, in this environment where we're going to have a number of administrative decrees probably coming our way, it's just really important that we recognize the lack of that public comment period, that we find ways to stick to the principles and values that we've already established to the maximum extent we can, even as we have some unexpected changes coming to these programs. So I'm going to say all this in a couple of just bullets. One, we're in favor of reducing the burdens. We are in favor of keeping the program moving to the extent we can, in spite of all the things that may delay them at this point. And we hope that together we can work with you on how we address those potential further delays that may be coming. And then finally, just that the principles and values that have been established through the legislature, through the board, through the leadership of the staff are really important as we evaluate these things coming our way. And we're counting on the best people to stay engaged. We realize that we're at a place in this process where there won't be a public comment period, but we need the best minds to stay engaged so we can focus on timeliness and values and reducing burdens. So I think that's our comments for today.
Thank you very much, Rob. Does anybody have any comments, questions of Rob? Okay, hearing none. Thank you very much, and we'll look forward to next month's update. Okay, let's now move on to item 7 on the agenda, which is to confirm our next meeting of April 14th, 2025. Is everybody able to make a noon to 4?
Yes.
See heads nodding. So April 14th at noon, that's our next meeting.
I will continue to have a challenge in the 1 to 2 o'clock period of time. We have an ongoing staff meeting here.
Okay. All right, let's now move on to item 8, which is Speed for Beat Act.
Yes, thank you. This is an important issue that's we're in the middle of right now, and it's really important for the board to understand all the extent of possibilities that could occur, because some of these could have some big implications for our BEAD program, which is, we're looking at $229 million in funding. So what's happened, of course, we've had a change in federal administration. Evan Feinman, who's been heading the program, his last day was Friday. We have Howard Lutnick, which is the new Department of Commerce secretary at the federal level. And there were hearings last week that started. The congressional hearing, which was held at the House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Communications and Technology, this is at the federal level, had a hearing. It was called it was labeled Fixing Biden's Broadband Blunder. So it was very, and if you look at the extent of the discussions, on one extreme, on the positive side, reducing permitting and speeding up the process could benefit all of us. On the other end of the spectrum is the possibility that, all of these under and unserved addresses get assigned to Starlink satellite. That would be a disaster. So it's tough to say where this is going. I will say that, if you look at the 50 states and the 6 territories, we've all been pretty much delivering an aligned message that first let the states decide what the best technology is, and fiber is a preference. So there's definitely been a unanimity in terms of alignment, in terms of how we're reviewing things at the state broadband level. Not sure how much that's going to count, but I'll do that as the introduction statement. But I'm going to turn it over to Alexi Montserrat and Tony Clitheroe, our attorney. Tony is our general counsel. Alexi is the BEAD head, and they can provide more detail. And we'd like to have an extensive discussion on this to ensure that you as a board fully understand the repercussions of the decision making that are going on at present. So take it away, Tony and Alexi.
Thank you, Christine. I think Alexi is gonna lead on this. So.
Okay, great.
Thanks all. Let me go ahead and share my screen. As Christine talked about, there are a lot of conversations happening right now in Washington. And the changes that are being contemplated, many of them are in this so-called Speed for BEAD Act that is the bill that there was a hearing on last week that Christine was talking about. Some of these changes, as Rob alluded to, reflect some longstanding issues that we know that some members of Congress have had, and so those are being codified here, and then some are relatively new. So what we'll do here is, just to frame the discussion, is walk through what's in the legislation as a way of talking about what the proposed changes are, and then I'll try to give some insight to the degree that we have it on how that could affect us, and sort of where we stand. I would just note that there is a lot flying right now. There's a lot of conjecture, a lot of people talking to a lot of people. We at BCBB, of course, are intensively monitoring all of this. We're engaged with our delegation and others in Congress, and so we are doing our level best to keep our ear to the ground and be speaking in a way that we believe will lead to positive outcomes for what's happening right now. As just a top line measure, the message that we as VCBB have been sending, and that aligns very much and is the emerging theme, I think, among all the states, is please leave as much of this to us as possible. That will result in the least amount of delay. It will result in the best solutions for our particular territories. So just to sort of give you that top line thing. Our big concerns, I'll get to some of those, but we are concerned about delays. As Christine mentioned, one of the issues that I think a lot of people have identified, both on the state recipient side and at the federal level, is the permitting process. Unfortunately, right now, this bill is silent on that issue. So we are still trying to understand where that's going to end up figuring in all of this. So just to give you the overview of the name, Streamlining Program Efficiency and Expanding Deployment for BEAD Act, or SPEED for BEAD. It was introduced by the subcommittee chairman and is currently being discussed at the committee level. It's, again, unclear whether this will become something that gets voted on, whether it's going to be something that essentially frames a lot of the issues. We don't know what it is that the Commerce Department, Secretary Lutnick, NTIA will simply do unilaterally. As Rob then alluded, the ability for any kind of public input or comment is limited. And so these are all part of the dynamics that we're trying to manage here. So let's get into what the changes are. So the first thing is it removes the word equity. So it used to be the Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment Act. This would change it to Broadband Expansion, Access, and Deployment Act. I think this follows along with this administration's general allergy to the word equity. And so they are seeking to change that. A thing that I think is interesting and significant is what happens to money. So in this failure to use full allocation, right now, if a state doesn't use its funds, they can return them to Commerce, which then can reallocate those funds. There's also some ways that we could talk to Commerce and NTIA about using some of those in-state if we had wanted to. So this would remove that. We don't anticipate having funds left over, so the impact on us of either one or two are, we hope, relatively minor, but we'll see how it all plays out. Another area where it removes some funding and limits us is on anything to do with broadband adoption. Again, Vermont didn't really have any within the BEAD context funds going to that. A lot of these fall into the so-called non-deployment, as in anything other than deploying broadband. And we didn't have any of that planned, knowing that we're very likely to need our full allocation just to do the infrastructure. So this is a thing that we are, of course, working on through our digital empowerment side of the DCBB and that funding stream from NTIA. But this probably won't have a huge impact for us for BEAD. This was one that Rob had alluded to. So it jettisons a lot of the requirements around payment of prevailing wages, labor, all of the union issues, and then some of the data cap or any ways that a state level, the grantor would get into monitoring agreements and ways that the network is being managed, and then getting rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which again has been a pretty consistent theme across the administration. We did expect a number of these things to happen. The Republicans in Congress and others have been pretty vocal about this all along. And so it isn't a surprise. And there are elements where this could lead to speeding up the program. So the big one is this issue where, and I want to define a couple of terms for you, just so we're sort of clear what we're talking about. There is the concept of reliable broadband, which is to say, and the categories were included in that are, of course, fiber, and then DSL, cable, and licensed fixed wireless. There was previously another tier that did not qualify as reliable, which included unlicensed fixed wireless and low Earth orbit satellite. This proposes to call those two technologies now reliable. The impact of that is, as we go through applications and we look at what is the lowest cost way to meet a difficult address, if in a situation where we're not doing all fiber, we would previously have only looked initially to cable, DSL, licensed fixed wireless as a potential solution. Only after all of those failed, for whatever reason, to be a viable solution, could we have then considered unlicensed fixed wireless and satellite. So this essentially ups those two pieces into the same playing field as some of these other technologies. Given potentially lower costs, it increases the likelihood of awards to those kinds of technologies. There is another term called priority, and this is the big one for us. What the legislation defines that BEAD should focus on priority projects. NTIA then added an interpretation of that into the NOFO that says priority means fiber. And it's a couple of sentences in the NOFO that pretty clearly make that point. It is unclear right now whether or not the proposals are meant to change this concept of priority. The impact there comes in that this is what a lot of people also refer to as the fiber preference, meaning that in Vermont's Volume 2 and in most of the BEAD plans, the idea is that the very first people that you talk to are the ones who proposed fiber. So when we're reviewing applications, what we said is that we will, any proposal that is for all fiber is the one we look at first. And assuming some conditions get met there, they meet gating, they are within a threshold, then that's who we're going to negotiate with first. And our scoring reflects that fact. You get points for fiber. If they were to change this concept or do away with the so-called fiber preference, that would have, frankly, I think, fairly significant effects. I would say that in all of these things, we also are not clear on what the implementation is going to be. And so even if they undo this, then we'll have lots of questions for NTIA about how it is that we then need to adjust to this. But it would certainly very much increase the likelihood that, based on the fact that satellite or other technologies are often cheaper just to get out the door than fiber, that we could find ourselves in a position where we are forced to issue grants for those technologies instead of fiber. Right, and this is where, when we are saying, we and most other states are saying to Congress and to the NTIA, please leave it up to us. This is the big thing. And some of the discussion in the hearing focused a lot on wanting to make sure that there were options, that you didn't have to do just fiber, and that if for whatever reason the location was difficult, that you weren't hemmed into just having to get fiber all the way to that location. The reality is that BEAD already has that flexibility, and we have that well built into our volume 2 as well. We've been very clear that we're going to look at a mix of technologies. We will favor fiber to the maximum extent possible. That makes financial sense. So this really is the biggie as far as anxiety that it causes us around the integrity of our program, as well as potential delays to us being able to get money out the door. The next one that certainly we've discussed a lot here at the VCBB is, if you'll recall, the current BEAD rules require a setting of a low-cost plan. There was a lot of discussion around what that number ought to be, whether it ought to be a number, whether it would just be a formula of some kind. In our volume 2, we ended up saying $30 a month, but with a band up to 75. So in other words, your low cost option could be as much as $75. And that would have been part of the negotiating process to talk through that with potential subrecipients. But this would simply do away with the concept entirely. And then this, I believe, last slide. So they added an element that allows us to modify the project areas sort of as we go on a rolling basis. So after we select an initial winner of a bid, then we would be talking to them about how they're going to accomplish meeting all the addresses. And within that, you would be able to identify an address that was causing problems or added a lot of cost or whatever it is, and remove that and set it aside and deal with it later. We already have that discretion. We have that in our volume 2, and so we don't have any issues here. Okay, that's a lot, I recognize, and there's a lot of nuance in here. So I welcome any and all questions.
All right, thank you very much, Alexi. That was great grounding information. I'm going to open the floor up to questions, and Laura has her hand up first.
Yep. Thanks, Alexi. Lots of moving parts here, some that could be helpful, some less so. I guess I want to zero in on, and maybe this is a comment for the board, a question for Tony. But as federal changes may or may not be implemented, I would hope that we would not facilitate kleptocracy occurring. We would not be a vehicle to facilitate that in terms of Elon Musk and the actions that we are seeing here. I would say that is the thing that I am most concerned about right now, is just that we are prepared to really seriously consider what we will do in the event that that is what is put in front of us. Otherwise, it sounds like there's a lot of negotiating going on. Our staff sounds like they're really on top of it. But that corruption, I want to make sure that we are clear. We need to have a pretty big discussion about before we become a facilitator of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Sarah, you're up next.
Thanks, Alexi. How fast is this moving? Do we have some sense?
Yeah, it's a little confusing because on the one hand you've got what Congress is doing, and then on the other you've got what the Hill is doing. Excuse me, Commerce. It could happen quite quickly. If the secretary has already issued one statement saying that BEAD is now technology neutral. We believe this alludes to the change to at least the reliable broadband, moving the satellite up into that higher level that allows us to consider it sooner. It could mean the removal of the priority. This is really the biggest question out there right now. But I think we've seen that they can move quickly on these things.
I have to think, the states must be all aligned in terms of, we understand our topography better than you do. But is that getting any traction, that the states do know their territories better than the federal government?
I do think, and Christine, if you want to chime in too, you've been a little closer to some of those discussions, but certainly the things that we've seen do indicate that. I don't know, Christine, if you want to add.
Yeah. We've all issued letters to our delegation, and I shouldn't say all. I've said many of the states, if not most, have issued letters on this, pretty much consistent. So it really gets to the political climate of the country at this point. The logic and the engineering is clear. Whether that makes an impact or not, who knows? We've been seeing commitments that we would have heard last week with the where the NTI position is, but like I say, Evan Feynman was here till his last day was Friday last week. So if anything, we should hear. I have a feeling we're going to move quickly, like everything else does in the government right now. Whether that moves in our favor or not, we'll soon find out. But go ahead.
And then whether they issue something quickly that then causes a significant delay in the program is the other thing.
Oh yeah, talk about the delay, Alexi, in terms of what
could be
could happen.
That it comes out fast, but then it's delivered from the top, and then that process inevitably of everybody figuring out exactly what that means for the programs will take a while, and potentially, if, for example, we were required to restart any of our processes, if they change the technology preference, if they get rid of that reliable, we would have to start all over again, because our entire bidding setup has been designed for that. And so we would have been essentially request our RFA would be inaccurate. Tony, do you want to add to that?
Yes, I just wanted to say that the Senate came out with a bill called the Plan for BEAD, which does a couple things which may be encouraging in terms of what our concerns are. The first is that it does include standardization of all the permitting type processes. And the other thing is that it imposes, or it's requiring the Commerce Secretary to develop a cap for non-technology neutral grants. So I think that is likely a nod towards BEAD, and probably indicates that fiber will remain as a potential preference, but that there's going to be some kind of limit, whether it'll be too low or too high. No one can say, but at least that there's that indication there that they're addressing needing to put a cap. So that suggests to me that maybe we're still going to have that preference. And as you pointed out, Alexi, that preference has not been eliminated from the House bill either.
Yep.
All right, Sarah, did you have any other questions? Okay, let's move on to Brian.
Where my small brain goes is, so none of the ARPA grants are subject to any of this stuff, right? It's only BEAD money, right? So that stuff remains in process, ongoing, unchanged, which is great. So do we, this is all speculation at this point, right? I know you guys it's moving fast and you're following it well. So thank you guys for that. I know that must be maddening. I would hope that the CUDs are paying attention, but not changing any of the work on the ground as it exists today. I mean, we still got several, we got a pretty vibrant construction season coming up. And it should be, as always, it should be full steam ahead on the current plans. I do wonder if it's not worth a discussion, not an urgent discussion, but a discussion at some point between staff and the CUDs about a what if scenario, that if this low orbit satellite option does get enacted and has to be considered, well, I guess first thing is what's a feasible time frame for that change to be enacted and suddenly be in front of us? Is it 3 months, 6 months, 12 months before you'd actually have to change behavior on the ground? And then two, just look at the universal service plans and say, how would, if you had to consider this technology, what at a high level, we don't have to get into the brass tacks, but just at a high level, would this potentially impact, the hardest 2% of your universal service plan, the hardest 5% of your service plan? Just get an idea about what kind of a response a build out would have, or a project would have based on this change.
Yeah, I'll defer to Christine on some of the CUD pieces, but I would just note as far as BEAD goes, number one, the analysis that you talked about at the end is one that we are working diligently on. We essentially need to do that anyway as a way of understanding our high cost threshold and some of these other elements. So Alyssa has led some pretty significant work into developing all that, which at the moment we're keeping confidential just because it's related to the competitive process. So, and then secondly, we were instructed by our NTIA federal program officer to continue forward with BEAD. The full proposal window is open. It will remain open. It is set to close on April 16th or 17th. So that remains the plan right now. So
yeah,
moving forward.
I can add some data around where we are. Currently, the eligible broadband serviceable locations, which means those areas that are not covered, represent 18,000 locations out of 310,000. So essentially that says we're about 94% covered right now. So, that I hear you on the what if analysis. I think that's a good suggestion, but I'm just just to give you an idea of where we are as we speak.
Yeah, and then just, I guess my last comment would be, tracking this stuff really important. Nothing should stop the current plans that are in motion. This administration, changes direction at the drop of a hat, logically, illogically, rationally, irrationally. And so a lot of it, I think we just have to assume will be noise until it's not noise anymore. And noise is one of the biggest distractions of actual progress. So, as I said, as construction season ramps up, should be full steam ahead with the current plans. Monitor what we should be monitoring, but don't let that distract from the great work that continues to go on the ground.
Yeah, well said. We appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you for those comments, Brian. Alexi, one question that comes to my mind is the reliability requirement aspect. And what we've been focusing on is highly reliable technology. Fiber to the home gives you, doesn't matter what the weather's doing, doesn't matter solar flares, the fiber works. Whereas low orbit satellite, I was at a meeting this winter where somebody was on a low orbit satellite plan and it was snowing out, and that we couldn't hear from this person in Rochester, Vermont, because it was snowing out. So you've got weather extremes that affect reliability, not weather extremes, normal weather conditions actually here in Vermont. If it's going to snow and disrupt your reliability, that's not acceptable. If you're in the shadow of a mountain, and that's going to affect service where you wouldn't get service from a satellite. That's going to affect reliability. How does reliability in these technologies of low orbit satellite factor in, and can we dismiss that because of it's an inferior product essentially?
Yep. You want me to answer that one, Alexei?
I'll just, why don't you handle the technical aspects? I'll handle the bead roll piece. I mean, this is one of the big things around, we don't know how they're going to tell us how to evaluate that and what we can and can't discriminate in between. So again, this is also where we're saying leave it up to us. And then we are also making clear that there are technical reasons for this, which Christine can speak to.
Yeah, and prior to this administration, the NTI rejected low Earth orbit satellite as an unreliable technology for a variety of reasons. One, you've identified in weather conditions it can be a problem, but also the number of satellites it would require. It would take it would take so many satellites in order to cover, the underserved address across the state of 28,000 satellites, which becomes a physical constraint in the skies itself. And then the other part is the radio uplink. It's a radio uplink to these satellites, which radio has a limited capacity as well. So it's already been recognized as an unreliable technology. It's a case where there's a possibility, and we've certainly seen a lot of discussion that this current administration will label it a reliable technology in defiance of what was known before.
So let's hope that we can defend a state looking at technology on behalf of the state and recommending and moving forward with the best technology that fits our landscape, because Washington, D.C. certainly isn't familiar with the issues we have here in Vermont. My 2 cents. Any other comments or questions? Appreciate you all being on top of this staff-wise and pushing as much as we can, and certainly anything we can do at the federal level with our federal delegates, we should be. But it is a chaotic situation, and I think Brian said it best. It's a lot of noise going on, but we still have a job to do, and we got to focus on moving forward what we've got in play. Okay, let's move on. That brings us to our final public comment period. Christine, do you want to take that?
Yes, at this point, we're open to public comments. Feel free to raise your hand. I will call on you as you're in the order that your hand is raised, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Would anybody like to make some comments? Okay, up there, Rob Bitskay, go ahead.
I'm surprised my CUD colleagues did not speak up, so I will. I would just comment one thing on the conversation you all just had. We've got a fellow who is advising VCUDA, who is involved in a number of other states, and I have a friend who's basically one's supporting a broadband office in the South and one's doing one out West. And so they're trading a lot of comments back and forth. And honestly, there's some skepticism among them that Congress will pass a bill. We'll have the normal kind of debate process through Congress, but that instead maybe the financial aspects of this make it into the reconciliation bill as part of the budget. And the rest of it just happens by administrative decree. There's some language in the Assistant Secretary's authorization in IIJA, which basically says he can do anything else or she can do anything else necessary to accomplish the program. And so there's some sense that even while we're chasing kind of this congressional discussion, that may actually not be where the game is. And so, it just leads to the uncertainty of all of this. And again, I appreciate all the work you are doing. we remain hopeful that it won't be too long of a delay and that we're able to continue, and that we don't have to, submit things a month from now. A lot of folks are working really hard right now on these applications to get them submitted by the deadline. It would be tragic if the state didn't have the authority to continue with the program that's already been approved and started over. So I don't know if any of the CODs want to comment, but I thought I'd say something in case someone else wanted to speak up before you close the comments.
Yep, Krista has her hand up. Go ahead, Krista.
Hi, thanks. I don't usually participate by phone, so I was having trouble finding the hand. So thank you, Rob, for those comments. And I just really want to also say thank you to the VCBB staff for the work they're putting into this. We are continuing to work on it from Vakuda's perspective in terms of putting together talking points and trying to find places for those talking points to take hold, coming from areas that might be more well received from the current administration. And I think I want to emphasize a couple of maybe framework questions to think about, which is it's the difference between looking at this as an infrastructure program versus looking at this as internet for all. And it's not just about getting broadband to every house. It's about forming the fundamental infrastructure for our state. And that is a public safety issue. It's emergency services, it's telehealth, it's communication. But we're talking about replacing a failing copper line infrastructure with a fiber line infrastructure. And I think that framework, that public safety framework and that infrastructure framework, that's the message that, our governors and our reps need to be bringing forward, is give the power to the state to implement an infrastructure program for the needs of their state. So I do think that a lot of things are going to be imminent. And to Laura's point earlier, I do think that, our best bet is to try and find a way through in which we can do what's best for the state. But I think if this really becomes something, in the order of like $3,000 an address or something absurd like that, then we should consider, and the state should consider, joining with others in bringing suit, because it's not something, this is not an opportunity that we have again. And it is in statute now. And I do agree that there's a number, we've heard from a number of places as well, that it's unlikely for any statutory bill to make its way through in the current atmosphere. We would support our delegation doing it if we knew there was a pathway for the state to make a decision to build the infrastructure that it needs for the long term. So thanks.
Thank you. Ellie, go ahead.
Okay, thank you all. So I wanted to reiterate a lot of the points made by my colleagues, by Rob and by Krista, and in particular to pass along thanks to the staff for everything that you're doing. And I also want to acknowledge that there is quite a large degree of uncertainty right now. I think that Dan made the point well. It's very difficult, or maybe it was Brian, but it's very difficult to react to potential changes. And so I think that one of the things that we all need to keep in mind is the ability to rapidly react when something does change. But I think that what we've heard from staff is very much in alignment with my view, and I think the consensus within Vakuda, which is that the program should be streamlined and refined rather than canceled or fundamentally changed. I think Krista makes an excellent point that this program, this is a bipartisan infrastructure bill. This was not a bill to connect all of the houses. And we need to make sure that we, I mean, obviously that's not lost on the group here, and we understand that there's decisions being made in Washington. But I think keeping our eye on the prize in terms of what Vermont is trying to accomplish is really important for all of us. And I think the point you made, Patty, about the reliability of Starlink, even if there is a shift, and even if we were to say, well, the KPI is now connecting all the houses, not putting in infrastructure, which is foundational for so many things, even that is questionable as to whether or not it has the reliability characteristics. But again, we are operating in an environment where technical truth is sometimes subordinate to the wishes of other individuals. The final point I want to make is just in terms of the timing, that having a delay in the program would not be a good thing. And different CEDs are at different spaces in terms of where they are with how much cash is left and where they are with their build. But just fundamentally, we have unconnected Vermonters who've been unconnected or underconnected for a very long period of time, and having them wait even longer is really going to keep those communities even farther behind. So, like some of those, for example, the most obvious large clusters that are up in the Northeast Kingdom. And I think, again, the point about the administration's views on equity notwithstanding, I think that it's important for us as Vermonters to make sure that we focus on everyone in the state having the same foundational access. And so anything which delays or perpetuates the status quo of some areas having service and some areas not having service is something we need to fight. And so I think I just wanted to make sure that that point about urgency was injected into the conversation as well. Thank you all, and thank you all for your service, staff and board.
Okay, thank you, Ellie. Anybody else would like to make a comment? Please raise your hand. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody else. I think we can move on in the agenda.
Okay, thank you, Christine. And thank you, everybody, for public comment. That brings us to item 10 on the agenda, which is our board review executive session slot. I'm making a motion that we move into executive session pursuant to 1 VSA section 313A33, authorizing a public body to hold an executive session to consider personnel matters. Is there a second?
I'll second that, Patty.
Thank you. I'm going to give it to Sarah. Any discussion?
No,
All
I
those in
think
favor?
we
All those in
lost Ginny,
favor?
so I want to. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm still here, Christine. If you just let me
Okay.
know who you would like in the executive session, I'd be happy to open the room.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, we're just going to do board members, Ginny, but let's take a vote. All those in favor of the motion to move in executive session, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed?
All right.
Ayes carry 5-0. Jenny, the 5 board members will move over.
Yep, I'm just saving it now. And the room is open.
All right.
So you should go over automatically.
And that would be the end of the meeting, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so thank you all for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. See you soon.